Hey, it's Brad here. Before we get into today's podcast, and it is going to be a goodie, we are talking about the start of the taper because that's exactly where we are in our Comrades training right now. I just want to let you know, and I'm super excited to share it, that the Coach Parry custom pacing bands are available to pre-order right now. So doesn't matter what your goal time is. If you want to run a 10:12, maybe you're targeting a 7:49, or perhaps you want to run an 11:53. We can custom print you a pacing band for your exact goal. All you need to do is head over to the link that is in the podcast player or in the description of this YouTube video you're watching right now. It is coachparry.com/band. You can also scan the QR code that's on screen right now. It'll take you straight to that page. You can pre-order your pacing band. What I would suggest is pre-ordering a plan A, a plan B, and possibly a plan C, just so that you've got all bases covered. So head over to that URL right now, pre-order your pacing band, and we'll make sure that it's printed and waiting for you at the expo in Durban Comrades weekend. So head over to coachparry.com/band. We look forward to meeting you at the expo. Now let's get straight into today's podcast. Welcome back onto the next edition of Down. This is the Comrades Marathon podcast. My name is Brad Nadauld. We've got the coach Lindsey Parry with us. And Lindsey, I've been asking you this question since January. Is it time to taper? And you can finally say,
almost. No, I mean, in reality, yes, we are. It's a month to go, but it'll be a very slow taper in the beginning, and in fact, it won't feel too much like a taper for the first 2 weeks, and then it'll be a nice sharp taper. But that's the reason why I like to talk about it 1 month out. People do like to have a picture of what's coming ahead of them, and so the answer is yes, we are tapering. Brad, 2 weeks ago, you pretty much ran 50 Ks. A lot of people ran their 45s. This past weekend, a lot of people ran, a lot of the silver medal guys did the last long run. So actually anything from here is going to be less than what you've done. So yes, the taper has started. Will the next 2 weeks still contribute to your running fitness? Yes, they will. So that's why we want a slow taper for the next 2 weeks. And then the big taper comes really in the final 2 weeks. But yeah, it's taper time. And that is good news. Mentally, it's a good time because we've touched on it a few times in the last two pods. It's cold. It's winter. You can see we are now in winter gear up here on the high felt. It's chilly. It's dark. It's time for comrades to come. Though that's kind of how people are feeling. So yes, Brad, we are rolling downhill towards race day now.
all right, cool. So we're going to talk about what to do from a taper perspective over the next 4 weeks. Linz, before we dive into the actual sort of nitty-gritties and exactly what we should and shouldn't be doing, let's just talk about why we taper. Like, what is the reason for the taper? Because I think if people understand that, it does make this process a little bit easier.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And it's for mental and physical freshness. Okay, so that's what we're doing. So when we do a taper or when we stop training, let's take that step back and go like, why when you get injured do we always repeatedly say like missing a few days isn't the end of the world? Because what happens when we taper? Obviously, there is the slight detraining effect, which is what gets people so nervous. However, everything else swings around. Your freshness goes up, even your ability to sleep. Because as you get into the worst part of the training, our sleep just about starts to become compromised because we're just sneaking into overtraining. So in the initial phases of tapering, we also have an improvement in sleep. So our mental freshness goes up. This like constantly trying to fit this training and the long training into your day and having to wake up so early means we can wake up a little bit later, means that if we people who train during the day, we finding less time in the day. So all these small changes as we go along are mentally making it much easier for us to deal with the training. And then physically, the body is able to repair and improve even more than in our normal recovery cycles of training. And so we get this like super compensation during recovery, which means that you land on race day feeling fresh, but actually being really fresh with a bounce in your step, with a freshness in your muscles. Any little aches and niggles that you've got have settled down. And that's why the taper is so important, because it actually allows you to bring out a massive performance out of yourself on race day.
Yeah, Lindsey, and then the danger is too, I mean, you talk about taking time off when you're injured, but I think a lot of people during the taper phase get nervous that they're going to lose fitness, that they've done all this work in the months leading up to this, and they feel like if they're not running as much as they were, things are going to go south leading into race day, and that's not the case.
No, so let's pretend we are unable to run at all. So if we look at the physiology of someone who can't run at all, if we do absolutely no exercise for a week, we lose no fitness. Okay. So our fitness loss is so minuscule it doesn't even register in a test, but our freshness goes right up. So we're able to perform a whole lot. If we do absolutely no exercise for 2 weeks, we lose fitness. Okay. But the loss of fitness is easily compensated by the freshness. So effectively, after 2 weeks of doing absolutely no exercise, we will be at a very similar point to where we were 2 weeks ago. And it's only at 3 weeks of no exercise that we get a noticeable loss in performance through loss of fitness. So if we now take away the fact that we're not going to be doing no exercise, we are just gradually reducing our exercise. We are taking 3 weeks to get to point where we could be, I guess, at 1 week if we did no running. But it's a terrible way of doing it, because that really gives you gremlins in your head, because then you just feel sluggish and like, I haven't done anything. And if you do absolutely no exercise, then it can become difficult to sleep, all of these good things. But at 3 weeks of really just gradually taking out the or dropping the volume from your training, that's where we get to this point where we are fresh and we can perform well above what we were capable of doing without a taper.
All right, cool. And then before we get into the actual specifics, let's just talk about nutrition during this time too. Obviously, when we're training hard, our appetite generally does increase, unless we're going to overtraining, where then does drop, where you don't feel like eating. But let's just say everything is normal. Do we keep eating as much as we have been eating throughout this taper, with the risk of maybe putting on an extra kg or two, or do we need to cut things back there too?
No. So you want to keep eating well, because we do want to, again, shore up our stores, give our body all the nutrition it needs to make the repair, to make the super compensation, and get us ready for race day. The place where we have to be a little bit careful, Brad, is right at the end. In the last 3 to 4 days, people are then inclined to do heavy carbo loading. And the reality is that in those last 3 to 4 days, you're doing very little activity, but we are still eating normally. So you are carbo loading anyway, without even realizing it, and then piling more calories on top of that. People can easily put on 2 kilos just in the last week of Comrades training. So no, we want to keep things fairly similar, what we're used to, keep fueling ourselves properly as we've been doing, and just really allow the body to nourish itself properly during this taper phase. And then right at the end, when we just about pull most of the activity out, you will get a carbo loading, carb sparing effect. But yeah, I wouldn't skimp on food. It's very difficult to work out exactly how much calories you want to eat. So if you want to kind of adjust your calories to your exercise profile, but still make sure you're getting enough, you need to do that with the help of a dietitian.
All right, cool. Let's talk specifics. The next 4 weeks, the Comrades taper is quite different to like what you would do for a marathon or slightly shorter distance, like a 5, 10, or 21. Talk us through the specifics of the way you suggest people do and approach the next 4 weeks.
100%, and it is quite different to shorter distance races, because to elicit the big performance we need at Comrades, we can actually do it with less risk. So that's the The main reason for the change is that we don't need that risk. So in a typical taper, we will drop the volume, but we will push up intensity. And so that is so that we don't want to maintain the overall load. The overall load does need to come down, but the driving up of the intensity just helps the body not to lose that load too quickly. Now, when we're doing comrades, yes, we're looking to get this massive performance out of ourselves, but that massive performance isn't about being fast. It's about being able to maintain for a long period of time. And so we don't need to have the same risk of driving up that intensity. Having said that, I do like to have some intensity in there. But what I always tell people there is that those higher intensity efforts in the Comrades taper are more sort of tempo threshold um, sessions. They are there to kind of keep us activated, keep us stimulated, but we don't want to risk getting injured. And so if there's 400s on the program, for example, you don't need to go and bash out those 400s to the best of your ability. If you're capable of doing like 1 minute 45 seconds for 400 when you're training for marathon, you can do 150 now in your Comrades taper. If you like an 80-second on 100 person training for close to 3 hours for a marathon, so normally doing 75 to 80 seconds on a 400, then you can do 85 to 90 seconds on that 400. So you're still pushing, but when you get to the end of the session, you feel like you could do many more repeats, but you feel like you've done a bit of work. So that's the one and most important change there. And then the other part of it is that because we have been doing such long runs, when you compare marathon or 10 or 21K training, we've been doing such long runs. Our other biggest change is just literally the taper is just pulling that long run down every week. And just by virtue of chopping that long run down, that freshness really starts to come. And so we can largely train in a similar vein in the Monday to Friday in week 1 and week 2 of the taper. And then in week 3 of the taper, that's where we like literally cut everything down to size. And then in that final week, we'll do half of what we did that previous week. So in other words, very little, just a little bit of something every day, just to keep the body loose, keep things firing, keep us stimulated, but really allow us to freshen up.
Yeah, Lindsey, the tape is an interesting one because people get quite antsy, and I can speak from personal experience here. I don't enjoy, and everyone's different. So some guys like a real sort of like aggressive taper, like train right up to the last minute and then taper. Some guys like a longer, slower taper. I still don't know what I like, but one thing I have picked up is I get very sort of anxious during the taper, like I just, because I'm not maybe running as much as I used to, and then I don't know if it's my head starts playing tricks with me, but I start picking up these phantom niggles. And Two Oceans is a prime example. And we had this conversation where I've been fine, and then all of a sudden, 2 weeks before Two Oceans, all of a sudden I've got this knee issue where there's this pain while I'm running, and it's a sharp pain. And like we took time off, like my taper for Oceans, like I literally didn't run the 2 weeks before Oceans because I was so nervous about this knee. And then on race day, like literally in the first half a K, I felt it once. And then that was it. Didn't feel it again for the rest of the day. So it was obviously a phantom niggle. There was nothing wrong with me. It was all in my head. But how do you deal with these sorts of things where from a mental, I don't want to say mental health perspective, but from an anxiety and your mind playing tricks on you, how do you deal with that sort of stuff during the taper? If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsey and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
So that's why I like movement. And often, like if I work with people on the extreme, so let's if working with an elite athlete trying to get a gold medal, and they typically train twice most days of the week, whether it's strength and running, or strength and cycling, or running and running. Typically there's 2 sessions and some days 3 sessions in a day, and then suddenly you get to 2 weeks, 10 days out, and now we want to do this massive taper. And what I found in that scenario is that where there was a session, there must be a session. So a strength session might turn into a stretch and a roll, mobility and a roll. A 45-minute recovery jog might turn into a 15-minute spin on a stationary bicycle plus some mobility. But there must still be, where there was something, there must be something, and it just has to be at a much reduced volume, reduced intensity, reduced impact on the body. So that's one way to alleviate the anxiety, is to, if there was something there, then go and do a mobility flow or something along those lines, just to keep movement, but to make sure that you are still freshening up. The phantom niggles is much harder, because next week we're going to talk about what to do if you get sick or injured in these 3 weeks. And so, when you explained to me what the knee pain was and how it was coming and going, I wasn't worried about it. But that's the hardest scenario, because you don't want to ignore something that's sore, because if you ignore it and it gets very sore, then you've got a problem on race day. So that's where I've kind of got to use my experience and go, like, the things that you're telling me aren't consistent actually with any kind of knee injury that I have seen and know about. So actually, there's probably nothing wrong. But yeah, in your case, at least we could substitute that with cycling, and we still kept you very active in those 2 weeks. We just drastically reduced your running for your head. But those are the games that we play. So I think by and large, you want to just have a kind of a formula. Now, the biggest difference, Brad, you alluded to people who like to do it this way, like to do it that way. The biggest differentiating factor for me to make that decision is, am I somebody who the day after a rest day feels fantastic? Or am I someone who the day after a rest day feels a bit rusty and blur? Now, if you're the kind of person that feels awesome the day after rest, you can afford to do much less running in the final week, but in particular, in the 2 to 3 days leading into Comrades, you can do almost nothing and you'll feel amazing on race day. If you're someone who feels a bit blur after you've taken a rest day, you will do more actual sessions in the final week, but they must be short, very short sessions. And you will do like what we call strides or run throughs. So 3 to 5, like 50 to 80 meters, where you build up to 5. They are not sprints. You build up to like a hard 5K effort. So you're building up your effort, but you're not sprinting. And those sessions, you want them to last 15 to maximum 20 minutes, and just 3 to 5 of those. And that tiny bit of work will still allow you to taper and feel good, but also because you've had movement, you won't have that, like I call it, hibernation. Your body goes into hibernation, everything tightens up, and then you feel really rubbish for the first 8 to 10 Ks of Comrades, because your body just needs to warm up and get going again. So that's kind of how I use to decide who needs to do stuff in the last week and who doesn't need to do stuff in the last week.
Hey, rather feel rubbish the first 8 to 10 Ks of Comrades than the last 8 to 10 Ks of Comrades, Lindsey. That's my strategy. But yeah, it's interesting I hear you saying that, because I'm definitely one of those people that feels better after a rest day. So that's perfect. And then you talk about, if there was a session, make sure there is a session, just to fill it in there. Now it's not the time to be taking up new sports to fill those sessions. I think that's important to say as well. And interesting, Lindsey, I don't know if you remember this, but it was probably this time last year, I mentioned my brother on this podcast, who decided he was going to go play golf in the build-up to Comrades, and stood in a hole and twisted his ankle like badly, like it looked like a soccer ball. It was massive. He sent me a photo a week and a bit ago. He was walking on the beach and kicked a rock. He has a toe the size of a golf ball. So, yeah, definitely not good. So hopefully all the bad luck is on that side of the family. It doesn't come to my house. I'm happy with that. But things like playing tennis or paddle just to fill those gaps is not a good idea now.
No, team building, obstacle courses, or CrossFit classes, or going and trying pedal out for the first time with a bunch of mates. Those are not things that you want to be doing now in the last month leading into Comrades. You know, I have to also keep saying to people, we aren't professional athletes. So, of course, our whole life isn't riding on this, but you've worked hard. You've worked hard for the best part of 5 months. And now you want to go and ruin all of that by trying something new. I think the hardest part for me always when I was still running Comrades every year was in this last week, like telling my kids that I can't kick a soccer ball or whatever with them, you know, because I've literally been training myself into a coma, and I don't want to step in a hole in the garden. So, yeah, I must admit, those were the last month. I think was always the hardest for everyone, not just for the runners, and that's why I often make the joke when I'm giving talks in and around Comrades to people that are about to run Comrades, that in the last week they must really take advantage of it and get their family to do stuff for them and whatever, because once you've finished Comrades, no one in your family wants to hear about Comrades for at least another 6 months. So you've used up all your credits with the family. Your kids are tired of hearing no. So once you've done Comrades, you've got to get out there. Even though you can hardly walk, you better get that football out and go and start kicking it around in the garden.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So just to sum up things with the taper, Lindsey, we are easing into the taper. There's still lots of training still to be done. You mentioned sort of cutting back. Have you got like a rule of thumb by how much you cut these long runs back over the next 4 weeks? Like for somebody who's going, okay, cool, this is what I have been doing. What do I need to do? What is the ideal?
Yes, I basically cleave off an hour is the kind of rule of thumb. So 4 weeks out will probably still be quite close to 3 hours, and then 2 hours, and then an hour to an hour and a half, and then the last, call it on long run day, will be like 10 Ks. So that's kind of more or less 4 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 and a bit, 2 weeks to go, 15 to 20 Ks maximum, and then 8 to 12 Ks that very last weekend. So that's kind of my rule of thumb on the long runs. Then, as I said, it'll be kind of normal, and then it'll be I take off a little bit in the midweek with 3 weeks out, then cut 75% of, or I do, so I cut 25%. So 75% of the midweek stuff in 2 weeks out, and then in the run up to the race, 50% of what I did the week before. So that's kind of how I work it out in a rule of thumb. Yeah, changes a little bit depending on individuals and how many sessions they're doing and that sort of thing. But that's a pretty good way of working it out.
And then I asked you about sort of people who have done little, like
Too little, yeah.
underdone versus overdone. What happens if you get to this point and you are absolutely knackered, where you're probably thinking, you know what, I've done too much? Is it worthwhile going even more aggressive on the taper for someone who's in that boat?
Make sure that you strip out all intensity. So if you're in that boat, you could go more aggressive on the taper, but I'd go more aggressive from week 3. So this week, I would just strip out all intensity. I'd still try and get to maybe a 2.5 hour run on the weekend, maybe not 3 hours. So yes, you will be a little bit more tapery, but all intensity out, very low intensity, very low heart rate. And then from 3 weeks out, I'd probably then go like, instead of doing the 75% 2 weeks out, I'd do 75% 3 weeks out, and then maybe take another 25% off. So not 50%, but then another 25%. And then, so maybe 25 is a bit too aggressive. So maybe 15%, and then 25% off, and then, into your normal. So yeah, that's kind of how I do it.
Awesome stuff. Linz, we're going to be talking about the route next week and breaking down exactly like what to look out for on race day, how to, I don't want to say attack, because you don't attack Comrades, that's for sure. If you do attack Comrades, it is going to attack you, but how to sort of approach each section of that route. We're going to be talking about that in depth next week. So make sure you hit the subscribe button if you aren't subscribed to this podcast yet, so you don't miss out on that one. And before we do that, early on in this podcast as well, you would have heard that our pacing charts are on sale right now. You can grab them by heading over to the link that's in the description of this podcast, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on whatever podcast player you listen. You can go and pre-order your pace bands, and we'll have them waiting for you at the expo in Durban on the weekend of Comrades. So we look forward to seeing you there. Come pick up your race, your pace bands, come say how's it. And best of luck over the next week. We'll chat next week, Monday. Cheers, Linz.